Okay, these are solving one-step equations using multiplication and division. So in our last stop, or pit stop, excuse me, we did it with addition and subtraction. Now we're going to use multiplication and division. So this is chapter 8, stop 1, pit stop B. Okay, pit stop A was adding and subtracting. So this is pit stop B. Okay, notice that this page looks very, very similar to your last set of notes for addition and subtraction. That's because we follow the exact same rules. So let's revisit those rules. Step 1, cut it in half. So we cut our equation in half to make sure we keep it balanced. Step 2 is to isolate the variable. Okay, so we want to get the variable by itself or get the letter by itself. In order to do that, we use the inverse operation, okay, or opposite operation. And I will be making you use these vocab terms in class, so make sure you learn them. So use the inverse operation. Remember, what you do to one side, you must do to the other. Now, as you notice on 1, 2, and 3, there's pictures there for us to draw again if we would like to, but it gets kind of confusing when we're multiplying and dividing, so I'm not going to go through the drawing of the pictures. If you want to see this, then you can just ask your teacher and we'd be happy to show you. Okay, so number 1, 2 times x, remember a number next to a variable, that coefficient. Remember the number in front of the variable is called the coefficient. That means to multiply. So 2 times x equals -6. So 2 times some number equals -6. We're going to figure out what that number is. So step 1, cut it in half. Step 2, isolate the variable. So I want to get x by itself. I'm going to use the inverse or opposite operation. So this is 2 times x. Well, the opposite of multiplying by 2 is dividing by 2. And what I do to one side, I'm also going to do to the other. Okay, 2 divided by 2 is 1. And if you remember, when we were combining like terms, did we ever write 1x? No, we just wrote the number x. So that is an understood 1. So because we don't have to write that 1 there, these cancel. Okay, with addition and subtraction, we were trying to get it to 0. All right, with multiplication and division, we're trying to get to 1. Okay, so 2 divided by 2 cancels. I'm left with x on this side, and -6 divided by +2. Well, 6 divided by 2 is 3, and a negative divided by a positive is a negative. Got to go all the way back to those integer rules. Okay, so I say x equals -3. Well, let's plug it in just to make sure. 2 times -3 should equal -6. 2 times 3 is 6, and a positive times a negative is a negative. -6 does equal -6, so I did that right. So again, we're following the exact same steps, exact same rules, however you want to think of it to solve our problem. Number 2, 9 equals 3 times x. So 3 times some number is 9. And I bet you can look at that and figure it out, but we still need to show our work. So step 1, cut it in half. Step 2, isolate the variable. So we want to get x by itself. So I need to make this 3 go away because the 3 is bugging the x. So that says 3 times x. So I'm going to use the inverse operation. The opposite of multiplying by 3 is dividing by 3. What I do to one side, I'm also going to do to the other. My 3's cancel. 9 divided by 3 is 3, and all I have left on this side is x. So I say x equals 3. Well, let's plug it in and make sure. 9 equals 3 times 3. Well, 9 does equal 9, so yes, I did it right. Sorry. Number 3. Step 1, cut it in half. Step 2, isolate the variable. So this says x divided by 2 equals 8. Well, the opposite of dividing by 2, or the inverse operation, would be multiplying by 2. So I'm going to multiply by 2. And what I do to, well, I could write it up there. I could just write it down here. Sorry, multiply by 2. What I do to one side, I'm also going to do to the other. My 2's cancel because the opposite of dividing by 2 and multiplying by 2, that's 2 over 2, which equals 1. Okay. I don't know if you remember, that's called the reciprocal. Okay, so we multiply by the reciprocal. All right, so my 2's canceled. So I'm left with x on this side, and 8 times 2 is 16. So let's plug it back in. 16 divided by 2 should equal 8, and 8 does equal 8, so I did that right. Number 4. Step 1, cut it in half. Step 2, isolate the variable. So I'm going to use the inverse operation. The opposite of dividing by -2 would be multiplying by -2. I'll rewrite it down here, sorry, times -2. So I'm going to multiply by -2 on this side. My -2's cancel. And then -7 times -2. Well, 7 times 2 is 14. And a negative times a negative is a positive. So that's positive 14. I'm left with x on this side. Okay, so let's plug it in, make sure. -7 equals 14 divided by -2. 14 divided by 2 is 7, and a positive divided by a negative is a negative. So yes, I did that right. Number 5. 15 equals -3 times x. Well, step 1, cut it in half. Step 2, isolate the variable, so let's get x by itself. In order to do that, I'm going to use the inverse operation. So the opposite of multiplying by -3 is dividing by -3. Divide by -3, because what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. My -3's cancel. 15 divided by -3, well, 15 divided by 3 is 5. Positive divided by a negative is a negative. And then all I'm left with is x on this side. Let's plug it back in to make sure. 15 equals -3 times -5. -3 times -5, well, 3 times 5 is 15. And a negative times a negative is a positive. So yes, I did that right. Number 6. Okay, cut it in half. Isolate the variable. So let's do the inverse operation. The opposite of multiplying by -4 is dividing by -4. What I do to one side, I'm going to do to the other. My -4's cancel. I'm left with x. And 24 divided by -4. Well, 24 divided by 4 is 6. And a positive divided by a negative is a negative. Plug it back in. -4 times -6 should equal 24. 6 times 4 is 24. And a negative times a negative is a positive. So 24 does equal 24. So we did that right. Number 7. 4.2 equals 2.1 times a. Cut it in half. Isolate the variable, so we need to get a by itself. I'm going to use the inverse operation, so the opposite of multiplying by 2.1 is dividing by 2.1. What I do to one side, I'm going to do to the other. My 2.1's cancel. So I have a on this side. And I have 4.2 divided by 2.1. So top in, bottom out. Top in, bottom out, typo. I cannot have a decimal outside my house, so I'm going to move it one time to make that a whole number. And what I do outside, I'm also going to do inside, kind of like what we're doing over here. So I move that and take my decimal straight up. 21 will go into 42, 2 times exactly. So a should equal 2. Plug it back in just to make sure. 4.2 should equal 2.1 times 2. 2.1 times 2. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. I have one number behind a decimal, so one time. So 4.2 does equal 4.2, so I did that correctly. Number 8. This one has a fraction, so we're going to have to bring back our multiplying and dividing fraction rules. Remember those. So step 1, cut it in half. Step 2, isolate the variable. So the opposite of multiplying by 1/3 is dividing by 1/3. What I do to one side, I'm going to do to the other. My 1/3s cancel. I'm left with y over here. Now I need to divide fractions. Okay, 9 divided by 1/3. I'm dividing fractions, so I'm going to put a 1 under my 9. And remember, when you're dividing fractions, it's keep, change, flip. So I'm going to keep, change, and flip, or write the reciprocal. So instead of 1 over 3, it becomes 3 over 1. Then I can multiply top times top, bottom times bottom. 9 times 3 is 27. 1 times 1 is 1. And 27 over 1 is the same as the whole number 27. So y should equal 27. Okay, we can plug that back in and see if we did it right. 1/3 times y, or times 27. Put a 1 under it. Should equal 9. Top times top, bottom times bottom. 1 times 27 is 27. 3 times 1 is 3. And 27 divided by 3 is 9. And 9 does equal 9, so we did do that correctly. Number 9, last one. 6 equals x divided by 5.3. Step 1, cut it in half. Step 2, isolate your variable. So let's get x by itself by using the inverse operation. The opposite of dividing by 5.3 is multiplying by 5.3. What I do to one side, I'm also going to do to the other. My 5.3's cancel. So I have 6 times 5.3. Remember, when you're multiplying decimals, you do not have to line them up. So 6 times 3 is 18. 6 times 5 is 30, plus 1 is 31. I have one number behind the decimal. So I have 31.8 should equal, and all I have left on this side is x. So x is 31.8. Well, let's plug it back in to make sure. So 6 should equal 31.8 divided by 5.3. Top in, bottom out. Can't have a decimal outside my house, so I'm going to move it once. What I do outside, I must also do inside. Let's take it straight up so I don't forget about it. So 53 won't go into 3. It won't go into 31, but it will go into 318. We got to figure out how many times. Well, we're hoping it's going to be 6, so let's see. 53 times 6 is 318. So 6 does equal 6. We did it correctly. So these are your notes on one-step equations, solving one-step equations using multiplication and division.